I was going to say you picked the first.
We'd like to welcome you to the Provo Municipal Council meeting. We apologize for the delay. It is 5:43. We are convened in the City Center Council chambers. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to the council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of the meeting. We'll begin with a roll call.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
Dave Sewell.
George Stewart.
George Handley.
Gary Winterton. David Harding.
Kay Van Buren.
Dave Connect.
Mayor Kafusi.
Wayne Parker.
Thank you. We'll begin with the opening prayer by Dave Graves and our Pledge of Allegiance by Jake Hilton.
Our Father in heaven, we come before the beginning of this city council meeting. We're grateful for this community in which we have to live and work, and for the blessings and freedoms that we enjoy here in this land. We pray that thou might bless those who address issues this evening, that they might be able to do those things that would be in their best interests and in the interests of the community, that the decisions are made will help to further the cause of our city and the goals and opportunities that are before us. We're grateful for the freedoms that we enjoy in this land and pray for thy continued blessings, and ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now have a presentation of the Employee of the Month, and that will be done by Jenny Starley.
Thank you, and you'll have to excuse Jenny. She had a work conflict this afternoon. So my name's Shiloh Harris, and I work for the police department, and I'm the Employee Association President-elect. It's my privilege to announce the October Provo City Employee of the Month, Ryan Stewart. Ryan works for the Public Works Department as an Engineering Tech 4. Ryan's supervisor, Chad Hill, has a presentation to share in recognition of Ryan and his accomplishments. After the presentation, we'd like to invite Ryan, his family members, superiors, council members, Mayor Kafusi, Wayne, and the Employee Association officers to come up front to take pictures. I'll now turn the time over to Chad.
I'd like to thank the council for the opportunity to be here this evening. I'm Chad Hill. I'm the city surveyor. I have the opportunity to work with Ryan every day. He is one of the best employees and fellow workers and friends that I've ever had a chance to work with. This kind of gives a little glimpse of a nutshell of what he does. That by no means we couldn't put everything that he does in a day or in a year in a couple-minute slideshow. This just highlights several of the big projects that we worked on this last year. I've known Ryan for the 4 years that I've worked for the city. I've known that he's been a lifelong surveyor. I know his dad. He's surveyed with his dad from the time that he was a little boy. He's always willing to go get it. He works hard and he plays hard. He's there every morning, and he's there till a lot of times after dark. Weekends, and we're always getting those projects done. And we joke about this, but we always say this, that he loves working for Provo City. This is kind of a quick list of some of the projects that this is the short list of the long list that we were assigned to survey this year. A lot of these projects were pretty high ticket, high dollar items, hot button items that we needed to have done really quick. Some of the big ones were Lakeview Parkway, 620 North, Duncan Aviation, our road rehab project. Amongst all these other projects, Ryan finds time he does GPS training for all of Public Works, and some of the Parks Department have GPS training that he performs that training for. He also downloads all the weekly Public Works inspectors' GPSs. He downloads that information and passes it on to all the GIS technicians so that can properly be mapped on the GIS system. One of the big projects we worked on was 620 North, the new street and the roundabout. When I say Ryan surveyed this, it started from, as you can see in the bottom part of the screen, it surveyed it from bare farm ground to actually the road that it is. We were asked to one of the big things we were asked is there was a lot of settlement concerns with this project. We were asked to monitor the settlement. Ryan was one of the big instrument. He came up with one of the ideas that we built these settlement plates. As you can see, there's a big steel pole with a plate on it. He built these. We welded them together. We placed them out. We monitored them every week with the GPS and helped create data reports for the engineers and for the geotech reports so that we could see what that road was doing throughout the process of filling that road in. And he supervised all the staking and construction staking of this from start to finish. Same thing went for Lakeview Parkway. We had different phases of Lakeview Parkway that we worked out. One of the big phases was a portion of phase 2 where we started from Boat Harbor Drive and went all the way up past the high school and tied into 1390, 12, I can't remember the road, 1390 North. This road was a lot of work as well. We had to create settlement plates for this. We staked this road several times, and by I mean several times. There were several thousand construction stakes that were put down on the ground over this project. Monitored and everything from bare farm ground to asphalt on the ground. Ryan was there for all the project, and it was a fun site to be a part of. Every year we're asked to help out with the road rehab project. After all the roads are overlaid by the bidder, the construction company, we're asked to go back out and place tabs on the new asphalted roads. This is a kind of a monumental task because we have to do it whenever they're paving the road. If they're paving the road on a Friday or Saturday, we need to be there as quick as possible to tab that road so it can be safe and tabbed and to drive on. Each year, Ryan helps and is in charge of more or less about 10 miles of centerline roads. And by that I mean just because the road is a mile long and we have 4 lanes of striping that goes on there, it means he does 4 miles of tabs on a 1 mile road. And so you add that up, there's multiple miles of roads that gets tabbed every year. He calculates these things. These alignments, he projects them in his data collector, and he's able to go and manage these projects as quickly and as best as possible. One of the big highlights that we did this year as well is we worked with the Parks Department building Spring Creek Park. He was able to build a DTM, which is a digital terrain model, which is a 3D model of what the park should look like when it's finished on his computer. He took that model and we downloaded into a basic data collector that the Parks Department had purchased. This is a lower end entry-level GPS. This isn't a high-end GPS, and they purchased this and they wanted to do high-end surveying with it. And so we worked with them, we got it figured out, we downloaded the DTM on there, and then we built a machine grading setup for their equipment. This machine grading setup probably cost $150, then plus the cost of the GPS, where it would have normally cost about $40,000 or $50,000 if we were to purchase it from the company itself. This has allowed the Parks Department to grade and build this park quickly, faster, under budget, and it's been a big success for us. We actually had the Trimble representatives show up one day. We showed the Trimble reps what we had done, and they were very impressed and have actually contacted me several times about this setup that we had done and how we had done so much with so little. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm always grateful for Ryan, as far as his supervisor goes in the survey department, engineering, and public works, is he's willing to do whatever it takes to get it done. And we're grateful to have him as part of our employment in public works, and we thank him, and we thank you for the opportunity to share this spotlight of him this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come down now. I guess we're going to do some pictures. Not really. After that presentation, I think that it deserves a round of applause for Ryan. Ryan, thank you. Thank you very much. Our employees are the best here in Provo. We really appreciate them. Brian, will you get us going on the public comment period?
I will, thank you. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. Excuse me. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Additional time may be given to individuals specifically invited to speak, such as applicants, neighborhood chairs, or others that may be representing additional persons. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium.
Good evening, Council. My name is Steve Christiansen from Provo. I have no complaints, and I'm not asking for anything. However, I do have 2 things to say. In the spirit of the season, thank you. Thank you, Council, for all you do, Mayor, city employees. We're grateful for all you do. We're a well-run city with excellent people. Second, this Friday is the 50th anniversary of George Stewart's 29th birthday. And I, as a friend and a neighbor, I want to celebrate him and would ask that the council and those in the chamber join me in singing happy birthday to George. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear George. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome. George is an amazing public servant and civic leader who, without his birth, we wouldn't be so blessed here in Provo. George, we wish you many more happy birthdays, productive and blessing our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll continue on with public comment. Okay, seeing no other public comment, we will close the public comment period and begin with item number 1, an ordinance to amend the general plan map regarding the land west of the I-15 freeway and south of the Provo River, Lakewood, Sunset, Provo Bay, and Fort Utah neighborhoods. And Bill Pepperoni, instead of Brian Maxfield, is going to present here.
Can we go to the map, please? So since it's been presented to you before, I'll just make a couple comments or clarifications. One is that on the map, you'll see acreages associated with the different land use bubbles. When the map actually gets adopted into the West Side Plan, the acreages will come off. The acreages will be taken off the plan. A couple reasons for that. Number one, the acreages were put on in the first place to help us calculate housing densities and building types and the land uses, those kinds of things. When this actually goes into the plan, that won't be as relevant. The other point on that is that in creating these different land use areas, we did not try to follow property boundary lines. There's a certain amount of ebb and flow that we expect to go with this. So as development applications come in, it's expected that there's going to be some give and take on the boundaries of all of those areas. The text of the plan will be very clear that these agricultural areas, although they're shown as kind of agricultural preservation now, the text of the plan will say that it's not intended for those to be agriculture perpetually. It would seem unfair to leave those in ag perpetually when the other land use within the airport protection area is airport-related commercial. They're shown in ag preservation now because there's been a outspoken desire to preserve some agriculture, and because those are largely owned by people who are content to leave it in agriculture for the time being. And in the survey we did at the very beginning of this process, you remember us showing you a survey of property owners that we contacted. Those were some of the parcels that said they intended to leave in agriculture for 10 acres or for 10 years or more. Next, the most significant ag protection for the area today is the agricultural zoning that exists. This map will not change anyone's zoning. When the entire plan is adopted, that will not change anybody's zoning. Zoning will stay in place as it is today. It will only change as property owners or people they've put the property under contract to come forward to the city and request the city to change the zoning. That's all I have to present. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about, I will, but I think you've heard a lot on this, so I just refer to your questions.
George?
I think I asked about this before, but I just want to get a little more reassurance about it. I mean, it seems to me that, I understand the public input thus far. I mean, it doesn't seem like there are very few places anywhere in the city where people are begging for higher density housing. But as you well know, we need more higher density housing, and I'm just wondering if you were satisfied with the density that's laid out across this whole plan, and whether or not it's really meeting our goals, both for higher density and for lower income housing.
Well, I think you're likely to hear from people who will speak tonight who would like to have more density on their property. When we posted this map on Open City Hall, or an earlier version of this map, not this map, an earlier version of this map on Open City Hall and took public input, we certainly had people saying that we were shoving in a lot of high density housing, and that version actually had less than this. That version had 7% of the land mass of the developable land in higher density, in this LDR, which is up to 15 units to the acre, or this MDR, which is up to 30. This plan, because of the most recent public input that was received and Planning Commission and Steering Committee latest input, this plan now shows 9% of the property in this higher density. My opinion as a planner would be that's still awfully low. But again, as we've talked about before, this whole process has been a big balancing act between those people saying, don't increase density on the west side, leave it open, leave it low density, and those people, asking for other things or thinking other things are better ideas. Taking all of that information into consideration, this is what the steering committee thought made the most sense and brought forward.
Are you at all concerned that this commits us to, this is a very significant, I know it's not a commitment, it's a plan, but it does obviously direct us in some pretty important ways. In terms of the city's overall objective to have more affordable housing throughout the city, well-balanced between higher and lower density housing neighborhoods. Does this skew the overall city plan in any way? Does that cause you any concern?
It probably does not, simply because we have so much zoning in place for higher densities where you can put more affordable housing. I mean, y'all just dedicated between 60 and 80 acres on South State Street for higher densities and more affordable type housing. And also, with that being said, another thing that influenced the Planning Commission on this was you saw a slide from Economic Development today that said the average income in Provo is $42,600 per year. When the Planning Commission saw that, I'm sorry, I take that back. It wasn't the Planning Commission, it was the Steering Committee. When the Steering Committee saw that, there was some shock, and so there was some discussion about these pods, this density, this yellow, is an attempt to raise that average income. That lower density will be more expensive homes, more expensive lots. And the idea was, let's try to raise that average income. This is our chance to try to influence that. And then these nodes were made to offset that by bringing some measure of affordability into the area. You notice these are all on the south side of the plan. They're all directly on an arterial road here or arterial road there. So there were reasons for those. But again, Mr. Hanley, it's a big balancing act, and I cannot say that I'm better juggling than you are. So,
Thank you. I'm lousy at juggling, so we'll just make that part of the public record. I'm concerned though that if we want to raise the median income in Provo, don't we want to do that through building employment in the city rather than building houses and just inviting people who already have that income? That seems a little problematic to me, because then we're just squeezing out the people who maybe are already here and are looking to get a toehold in the housing economy and can't. Does that make sense?
well, if we build employment, but those people live outside of the city, then their income isn't getting measured here in the city. It's getting measured where they
Yeah.
live.
So this conversation about the economic balance of in the neighborhood is relatively new on the west side. And I say that because ever since I can remember the west side plans that have come forward, even in the early 90s, it was calling for what we're seeing now. And one of the reasons was trying to find a balance in the neighborhood. We do want a diversity in housing, but the west side is predominantly, for many years, just starter homes and smaller homes, and didn't have the larger move-up homes. And so when I was on the council 10 years ago, that was the cry, is give us some larger homes so we don't lose our families. It wasn't about who's making how much and whether we can attract a grocery store by having more money in the neighborhood. And so that's become a secondary conversation, but it started out with providing a variety of housing and the fact that there were not significant amounts or numbers of larger move-up homes that would keep people within the community, so they didn't have to move outside of West Provo or outside of Provo to find that larger home.
Thank you. Any other questions for Bill? Thank you, Bill. Stay close, just in case. This item will be open to, let's first open it up for the members of the committee that were on that committee. If anyone from the committee that was on West Side Citizen Advisory Committee, if they would like to speak, would like to open that up for you now. We will be also doing it for neighborhood chairs. And so, Beth, if you're on both seats. If you want to go, you can take your time, but do both of them at the same time.
I will, if I have to get back up, I'll get, well, no. I will say my piece and then I'll sit down. Beth Alligood, I was on the steering committee. I'm also the area representative and neighborhood chair out on the west side. I just wanted to address your concern about density. It was a balancing act. We tried a lot of different scenarios. We're trying to preserve the nature of the area out there, and that's one of the biggest concerns that we heard from a lot of citizens. They did not want West Provo to turn into downtown Provo, and there's a lot of different areas in our city that have a lot of different unique characteristics, and those are the things that we were trying to preserve. As to your comment about building employment, if you look at the map, there's actually almost a quarter of this map is commercial. You have the airport protection zone, you have the village center, and you have a lot of neighborhood commercial zones that are in it. So we were trying to balance that work-live area also. The density has always been a big issue in the area because a lot of people out there, you also have to understand out there's a lot of water issues. There's a lot of building issues. When people start coming out, we're wondering if that's going to happen more, but we're willing to have a map in place so that those issues can be taken care of as things come up. And so we have a plan moving forward. Dave Connect was right. The larger homes, we lose a lot of families out of our area because they grow and they have nowhere else to go. I think in the last 2 years, the city has approved like 6 apartment buildings and maybe 1 single-family resident development. So I think there is a balance within the city as more housing comes in the ITOD zone and down in appropriate areas that have the mass transit, that have the areas of commercial already built up. Higher density there seems more appropriate than out in an area that really doesn't have. And I know people are aiming for a grocery store and we want a grocery store and we have opportunities for that, but I don't see a lot of amenities coming very quickly, especially with the wastewater treatment issue going on too. This has been a great effort by a lot of people. We have tried to accommodate so many people. We have tried to bring all those ideas together, and I think this is a great base to move forward on and to have on the books so that we can have a plan set forward. And I know the design phase with all of the written out about what all of this means is going to be very important, and I hope that we will get a lot of public input on how they view all of this coming to fruition. Any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
My name's Jonathan Hill. I was also on the committee, and I'm also the Fort Utah neighborhood chair. I don't think I'm going to add a lot of new stuff, just kind of reiterate some of the things that both Bill and Beth have said. Because we've been discussing these things. These are issues that we have carefully considered as a committee looking through. Do we have the right amount of commercial out in the area? Do we have the right amount of density? Are we balancing the rising house costs in Provo and Utah County as a whole versus the need to have balanced demographics in the city where families can stay as they grow and get larger? And I really do think that this plan strikes a great balance there. It can be deceiving sometimes. Bill said that it was about 9 or 10% LDR. However, LDR has 3 or 4 times the density, right? And so we have almost as many multi-unit zoning unit-wise in this area as we do single-family homes. It's almost 1-to-1. I also think as you look at this, you have to look at it in the scope of the larger city. As Beth mentioned, as we see the reports coming through as neighborhood chairs, we see apartment complex, townhomes, apartment complex over and over again seeking approval here in Provo. We are getting those units. What we don't see is we don't see larger single-family homes for larger, more mature families. And I think a reason for that is because most of Provo is fairly filled in. And when you take out older homes to redevelop it into newer homes, to make a profit, you're going to have to increase that density. And so we have opportunities for that throughout Provo, but on the west side, we have the only undeveloped land. And undeveloped land is the only land that you can profitably turn into single-family homes. And so we need to keep this area for that and allow redevelopment in other areas to provide the higher density homes. In fact, I did today just a little back of the envelope calculation. What I did was I took an area on the north bordered by Bulldog, on the west by 500 West, on the east University, on the south by Frontrunner Station, as kind of an urban corridor in Provo, right? And all I did was I took all the lots that I knew were for sale or were vacant, and I calculated them at a high-density residential area, and I found that we have room just from those. We're not taking out any homes that anyone's living in or any buildings that are being used. We have room for 3,000 units in that area. And that would be an area that has public transportation, it has restaurants, it has parks, it has all those things you need when you live in an urban environment. And so I believe that Provo will grow. I think that's clear. There's strong economic pressures to do so. As much as many of us would love to keep the horses and the cows out there, it's not going to happen. But we have an opportunity here to create a strong, vibrant urban corridor within Provo that is sustainable, that is affordable, and that will create a really vibrant downtown community, and then preserve the area that hasn't been developed for those who would like a little more open feel, an area, great views of the mountains, and little larger lots, and be able to have our cake and eat it too, if you will. That's all I have to say. Any questions that you have for me? Thank you.
Okay, that's the committee. We will now open it up to the neighborhood chairs, if there are any neighborhood chairs that would like to speak to this item. And Becky, you were on the committee too, so your name was on here, so.
No, I'm not on the committee.
Okay.
Becky Bogdan, Lakewood Neighborhood Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for pushing this back to give our neighborhood a chance to look at Bachholm's plan and to be able to comment on the commercial pieces. I have sent over you guys a ton of email. So that should take up the bulk of my comments. From watching work session today, I want to comment on Dave's question here for a little bit. I am 90% sure I know the grocer. I cannot tell you, but I can promise you it is not a Family Dollar. And I can promise you it will bring in a ton of traffic. And Mayor Kafusi will come on my front lawn and we'll do the happy dance together if it comes through. I guarantee you she'll go south to shop instead of Macy's. And I guarantee you'll have to take my bike trailer in order to go home with all your groceries. And that is a concern when we brought that in there. If there is no access from the Lakeview Parkway, that is a huge concern because that draws all that traffic through any kind of residential area if the Bachholm's plan was to come forward. But she is more than willing to have some kind of a thing. So that is a concern that was brought up there. Also the concern, there are some in the area that would like it all commercial to stay how it is, but for the most part, people want housing, not necessarily apartments. We talked a little bit about that in the email, how Bill was kind enough to move some LDR around to kind of fit the needs of the area. We like to keep that instead of higher density, but we would really like something that would help bring our area up. They talked a lot about how incomes are low, we're close to the boulders, we're lumped in there with our schooling. We'd really like something to help bring us up. Also, that commercial node over on 1100, we would really like that moved just because there will most likely, 90% probably, be some kind of either elementary school or junior high school over there on that district-owned property on that street. And I sent over a little thing from the police department stating how kids 14 and younger just cognitively can't cross that street. But thank you for everything, and I guess that's it.
Any other neighborhood chairs? Okay, then we will open this up for public comment. Anyone wishing to comment on this?
My name is Kristen Randall, and I have lived in this area for 40 years. I'm not from this area. I was brought up in Los Angeles and New York and Dallas and We came here 40 years ago and built our house here and with certain expectations. What we didn't expect was what kind of ground we were building on. The farmers knew this ground. They knew it very intimately. And when the developments came in, all they did was build on it. Mr. Handley, you are living on the east side, as I understand. You must understand that this is a completely different planet. You don't build on the east the way you build down here. This is I don't know how to explain it. It's a fragile place. We have water underneath us. Well, we used to have really great water. It was beautiful for agriculture because we had sub-irrigation. From what I understand, you didn't have to irrigate because your grass went down, your crops went down, they got the water from below. It was like the Garden of Eden. And then the helpful city came through and did all the storm drains down here, which absolutely killed that irrigation. So now, you pay $17,500 for one share of water, which gives me 50 minutes of water from an irrigation ditch for an acre and a half of pasture. It's a difficult thing. The thing you have to understand is you do not want to pack this area down here with people. It's hard to get emergency services down here. We are in a liquefaction zone. That earthquake they keep telling you, not if but when, is going to turn us into a mess like you have never seen. The more people you have down here, the more death and the more terrible things you're going to have to mop up after something like that happens, if you can get emergency vehicles to our side. So you've got to appreciate the fact that this ground is itself. It's not just dirt you build on. It has its own character. It has its own way of being. And I've worked with it for 40 years in my tiny little just owning horses on it. Used to be across the river from us. You try to put a fence in, and the fence posts would be gone the next day. They'd just fall over because the ground wouldn't hold it. 19 feet of peat moss underneath that road you just put into the high school. And I'm not sure that road's going to stay solid for very long. This is just, you got to work with what you have.
We're supposed to stay at 2 minutes, and you're a minute over, so I'm going to give you, just let you wrap up.
So I can do my little...
Yes, you can do your closing act here.
Anyway, when these guys got together to put this together, they worked their tails off. They were trying to take all of this stuff into consideration. The balance of how many people there are down here, the economic balance, the agriculture, the beauty of the area, all of those things, these guys worked their tails off. This map, as I'm telling you as a resident, is the best thing that I have seen so far to protect the area, the safety of the people, the sanity of the people. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hi, Kelly Watson with Bach Homes. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the items that were discussed. Obviously, what we're proposing is a plan that there's a lot of moving parts. We're trying to lock down a grocer, we're trying to ask for the reduced commercial, and then obviously, as mentioned, there's Lakeview Parkway access issues, the matter of the utilities, and I just wanted to address a couple of points that, the first one was that commercial is bringing in employment. It's proposed, a big box store would be there. Are these people really going to be making more than the $42,000? Sure, the airport commercial might bring in more skilled workers with higher incomes, but I don't think any level of commercial near the freeway is going to be bringing in any significant, pay raises for any residents that might elect to live near it. So I don't really think that's a viable argument for maintaining that commercial there. The other aspect too is that yes, we could put multifamily in other places like higher density, instead of multifamily is the word I should be using. But the issue with that is it already zoned for that? Could we get it rezoned? Traffic impact studies in these other areas, is it feasible? And are the people even gonna sell that have these, vacant commercial areas? on the east side or in other portions. So certainly that's an argument, but it's, you know, it has its own hurdles to deal with. So basically what we're asking at this time is an opportunity to work on this parcel and to have the low density and possibly medium density added to that parcel, and to have the commercial reduced, because it's a lot easier to come in and get commercial put back there. You guys are gonna, you know, jump for joy if something were to change and we wanted to increase the commercial, or some other person that acquired the land in the future, if for one reason or another we can't get access or utilities or other things in the timeline needed, other people can come in and petition for commercial, and I don't see any reason that it would be denied. But I think to downzone it from commercial, we're gonna be fighting an uphill battle, and I know it's only a future land use map, so it's not set in stone as many people have said, but it just makes it more challenging to have this amount of commercial to accomplish our project. So, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Karen Waite, and I have lived in the west side since 1972. I have just under 20 acres, and yes, I'm one of those few people who still have, you know, horses and a couple of cows. And I just want to add to this in that, yes, water is a big problem. It's been a big problem for some years. Every time more construction goes in, the water table does change. And I know that I have a large, well, it's not really that large, but I have a stock pond. It's probably, a quarter of an acre. It's dry. From 1972 until a year and a half ago, it was full of water. And a year and a half ago, it dried up, and then it came back a little bit. It's dry again. The water is an issue. Roads are certainly an issue. What I keep seeing is that we build houses, and then afterwards we think, oh my gosh, somehow we've got to, get some roads that will accept the traffic that the additional houses are bringing in. Anyway, the one thing I do have a question, and that is that what was in the paper, I had the impression that your map was going to go up a little bit further to the north than this. Is that correct? Is there a reason that it stops there?
Provo River's the boundary.
Provo River is the boundary. Okay, according to what was in the paper, it had said it would be up to the high school. Anyway, if you want to keep the place, kind of pristine, a little bit like it was, I'm sorry, but you're a good 35 years too late. I know when we first moved here, it was a rural route address, and we were part of the county. When our area was annexed into the city, that was kind of the beginning at the end. No, it's not going to be rural anymore. We're not going to have horses. We're not going to have cows. But we do need, very, very badly, we need housing for people who just simply, can't afford anything in Provo. That's it.
Thank you. Will you check my beeper here on this thing so people can hear it when their 2 minutes is up, if it's possible? No.
Hi, my name is Frank Stubbs. Me and my brother farm in this area. So yeah, we are one of the farmers, but I don't know how they came up with spot. One part is in agricultural and others in high density. Why can't the farmer also have high density? So when I decide not to farm, I don't have to go through the zoning. Why is some people picked out to already be approved for high density? I mean, did you have a lottery, or what happened on this map? How did you determine who got what color?
After the public makes their comments, I'll get up and answer all the questions that get asked.
All right, I'd like you to answer that, but I'd like the council to be aware of that. Also, our ground was part of when you put the new road, we call it, or I don't know what you call the road, in, and part of our ground was condemned. And we were taken to court, and part of those proceeds, and I have documentation, it was said that there would be no construction south of this new road. Thus, your ground is not worth as much as could be if there was to be. But on your map, I see that if you raise that up a little bit, that you have commercial going south of the new road. Am I correct with that? So, at the time the city purchased the ground to put the road in, I have documentation saying that they said it was only worth so much at that time, and so we're going to take the road, that portion of your ground, for the road at this cost. And yet now you're going to afford someone else the opportunity to put commercial ground. And yet now you're also thinking about putting a sewer plant south of the road. So I'm not understanding why this has taken place when I have documentation saying that you would not do that as a city entity. It's very confusing. So I have issues on both of, I don't know why everybody in this master plan doesn't have the opportunity of high density if they wish to.
Thank you.
Equal opportunity.
Thank you. Any other comments?
My name is Matt Carter. I do own some property in this area, and I too had ground that had to go to the city at a cheap rate, and it appears to me that everybody in the area that had to give up some ground at a cheap rate along that road should be able to get compensated a little bit like everybody else in the city. Other places in the city, they can put in high density and get 2, maybe 3 times what we can get on this ground down here. And so it should be fair, just like Mr. Stubbs said, everybody should be able to get some high density. The land has dried out. I farmed up there for 55 years, and I've finally moved. I took the dairy and moved south. It's crossed my mind to bring the dairy back or start in hogs down there. That'd be a still zone. They just told us it was still zoned agriculture, so I guess I could do that. If the neighbors, they talked a lot about farming and things. I guess if you really want to farm it, you can make it right with the farmers. Get out your checkbook. There was a case in one part of the state where people were upset because the construction area was going to block their view. And the man said, well, if you don't want us to build here, buy the ground. The people bought it. Some of the people that don't want us to build or don't want us to build a little higher density, we didn't fight when they put their houses in. Their houses are there. But now when we decide we want to farm or we want to sell, they don't like that. Farmers have been there a long time. They're getting tired. They'd like to move on in the area that we're at. On the earthquake, there's no worse down where we're at than it is up there against the mountains. In fact, maybe up there you'd have a lot worse earthquake.
Thank you. All right, you want to wrap up real quick here?
I will wrap up.
Thank you.
I've sat in with some of these committees And one of them, somebody said they'd like to see 6 houses per acre. Mr. Connect might have been there. He might remember who said that. I don't remember who said that. I favor higher density. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone else?
My name's Leanna Griffey. I feel for the farmers that want high density, but they're going to be moving on and we're not. We are the residents that will be living there, and we want single-family dwelling, and that is a need in Provo to have single-family dwellings rather than high density. We have high density all over the city. There should be one place that is preserved for single-family units, and this map is a good one. The only problem I have with it is that the commercial should be on the other side of the new highway because of the traffic congestions that Becky Bogdan talked about. To have commercial coming off of Fifth West when everybody's going to Fifth West to get to their homes, it doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense to put that on the other side of the highway where there is not residential at this point. So that is my only concern, and the builder, Bach Homes, has said that they would love to do single-family units and mixed in with apartments, and I think that would be a good fit for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no one coming forward now, we will close the public comment portion period. And Bill, do you want to address any questions before we bring it back to the council?
To Mr. Stubbs' questions, I would have really liked to have visited with the Stubbs personally and individually during this process. They've been out to every neighborhood meeting we've had, and every neighborhood meeting we've had, I've given them my card and asked them to call me so we can meet. I've called them to try to set up a meeting and have not ever received a return phone call. But I think it would have been productive to be able to talk. The Stubbs are correct in that they're one of the few people who still own land south of the road. They have long pieces that extend quite a ways. And so that we wouldn't have to be debating about that use of that property in the future, what I hoped to visit with them about was some type of opportunity or ability to transfer the density from those pieces on the south side to their property on the north side. We never got to have those discussions, but to the issue of the commercial on the south side, they raise a good point, and that was one of the issues that was debated a couple of times by the steering committee, and Beth Alligood was actually one of the people who said she just wouldn't support that. Can we move the map up so we can see that area? There are some good reasons we feel for doing that. We don't have a lot of freeway interchanges in Provo. We don't have a lot of the ability for direct access to a freeway interchange and the opportunity for regional commercial type uses. When those opportunities come along, they're rare and they should be taken advantage of. That's why it was put there. But we knew in putting that there that it would seem unfair to some other property owners who own property to the south, that the city was not encouraging development on their property, yet was in favor of something like this. This is a tax asset to the city. That'll bring in retail sales tax to the city. Any residential development that takes place on the south would be a retail drain to the city. The improvement to the infrastructure out here, whether that's a lift station or whether that's going to be a sewer treatment facility in the future, I don't know at this point, but Again, the city doesn't have very many places to put a facility like that, and that seems like a good location. To the issue of Bach Homes and this area over here, if Bach Homes brought in a grocer, the planning department and several other departments would bend over backwards to help that project happen. We'd be very willing to negotiate housing densities and designs and acreages to help make that happen. And I don't think we'd have to amend the plan to do that. So we're open-minded to whatever Bach brings in, but it needs to be real. There needs to be a definite, sure path to getting that grocer that's concurrent to any approval of any residential development. Those are the only comments I would make. If there's anything else I left out, please let me know.
Dave?
On the commercial that is just north, and the one that's with, I guess, Bach Homes is interested in, we talk about access only off of Fifth. However, I'm wondering, would it be appropriate to have a way to get off of the main road, just a one-way kind of entrance, and not a two-way, so that people can come off I-15 and go immediately into the commercial or the housing and not have to go all the way down to Fifth?
Is there any from engineering here? Do we have anyone from engineering here?
I just don't, yeah.
I hate to answer that question if we have the guys who really make those decisions.
But it seems reasonable to have just a one-way off-ramp or an entrance.
I'll just really quickly make a comment on that. From the public works standpoint, I'm not sure that there has been a determination in the zoning request that would be finalized, but there hasn't been any determination right now whether that would be allowed, whether it's a right-in, right-out, or any concept of traffic.
So you're not sure if that's on the table as a possibility?
It's a possibility, but whether, there's not enough information right now available to make a determination on that.
And I just bring it up because obviously we can't do another intersection, but sometimes that is an option.
It would largely depend on traffic reports. There's lots of information that is not available at this point to make that determination.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, we can't do that. I can't help it. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm not allowed to.
A few minutes ago, you said somebody called me up. That was me. A few minutes there, when they called me up, I'll be back later.
Any other questions from council? Okay, we'll bring it back. Any discussion from the council? Bill?
I'm sorry, I didn't answer Mr. Stubbs' question about how did some people get higher density than others. I apologize for overlooking that. So as I said before, you'll notice that all of the higher density nodes are right along an arterial class road and at the intersection of a collector class road. These areas that would be having to traverse through neighborhoods to get to a collector road didn't seem to make sense to have as higher density areas. That is the highest density area on the map, and again, that's Center Street, so direct access to a collector road and an interchange. These all have direct access to arterial road and the interchange. They're being against the south side, the north side of the road. That's an area probably less desirable for single-family homes to be up against a busy road. It gives us opportunities to play with the design of those projects so we don't have barrier walls like you tend to get when single-family subdivisions are against an arterial road. You get these back-facing barrier walls. by having the multifamily LDR areas there, it gives us a chance to do other alternatives and avoid having walls along the parkway. So there were a lot of reasons like that that went into it. That's what zoning does. Zoning does differentiate between properties and it doesn't treat everybody the same across the board. That's what zoning does.
Dave, and then Dave.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned, Bill, that we wouldn't necessarily need to change the general plan in order to entertain Bachholm's proposal?
That's correct.
Now, it shows LDR, they may want MDR there. So is that a problem? Do they need to then come back and change the general plan?
Again, I would have to see the numbers of units and the density, because as that LDR gets larger, does it give them enough units to accomplish they want? If they decide to stack some of those units or that type of thing, I would say let's do that as long as that density number is within that range. Now, if the density number goes higher, then we'd probably have to say, yeah, we better take this back to the city council and get them to weigh in on it. But I think we'd have, by increasing the LDR acreage, I would just like to see how that works out in terms of their numbers. So I'm not worried about building form, because I think they would be sensitive to putting the lower density against the neighborhood, putting higher density towards the middle. I think they would do all those things.
So even though some parts of it may end up being higher density, overall, it would not be higher density than...
That's how we would look at it.
Yeah.
Good quick comment on that. I mean, again, we're saying general plan, but this is the future land use map for a neighborhood in this an area master plan. And that would be my comment to the representative of Bachholm's and everyone here, that these very specifically were drawn as kind of bubbles, because what we're trying to communicate to the community is this is what you can expect. This is what we'd like to communicate to developers. This is what we're looking for. Now, if you come in with something that doesn't quite fit, but it's aligned with the vision of what we're trying to achieve, great, bring it in. All of this will have to go through individual hearings in order to be rezoned anyway. This is just a tool to communicate.
Plus, I think that flexibility gives some leverage to the neighborhood and to the staff to say, come up with a plan that we like, we're going to get behind this, and that will probably grease the skids to get the zoning you want approved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to kind of reframe, but basically echo what you're saying about zoning and about everyone having the same opportunity. I think that it's important as a city, when we create zoning, that we don't treat people preferentially, but we treat the land for what makes the most sense in the area that it's located. I happen to, my home is zoned R1, and I have very specific uses that I can use that for, and I cannot put it on, a multi, I can't go 4 stories up, and other places that we were talking about in our work meeting today, we're looking at, multi-story things, and those are in locations that where it makes sense, and so the owner of that land has access to those uses, and I don't, and it really depends on where it's located in the community, and I think that's what this whole exercise has been about. What is the best use to create the community that we want to create?
Mr. Carr, you can talk with one of the council members later. I just can't open that back up at this point. Yes, George.
Yeah, and I'm already on public record for really liking this plan, so my question earlier wasn't intended to say that I don't think single-family homes should be anywhere in the West or anything like that at all. I think actually it's a nice balance. I mean, I think it's important to point out that to the degree that you want to preserve agriculture, there's a limit to how much sprawl you can allow, and if you want to preserve open space, you have to find other spaces that are higher density. And I guess maybe I'm fully supportive of this plan. I just have a lingering doubt about that one MDR area up on Center Street, where it seems like that's a good opportunity to go even higher. But I suppose we can cross that bridge when we get to it. But it does seem to me that there are locations here where we could increase the density without running any risk with the land and the water and so on, and actually provide more lower income housing and more housing units for more income levels in a way that's healthy. But I think overall, based on our previous conversations and tonight, I'm content with the balance here. And I think, as we said last time we talked about this represents a lot of really good work and careful thinking, and I'm grateful for it. So thank you.
Anything else by the council? This is the second hearing for this item. So we are eligible to have we do have a motion, an implied motion on the table. Thank you, Mr. Jones. We do have an implied motion. Is there any discussion on that?
Comment.
Okay.
So I'd like to bring up one thing and see what the rest of the council feels about it. There was an observation made that on 1100 West, where it intersects with Lakeview Parkway, there's a commercial node, a small one, and the request was that be eliminated because of concerns with traffic on that road, where you might have a school in the future. I don't know if you've read those concerns or what you might think about those, but I would like to bring that up and see how you feel about changing that particular node and not having one there.
Can we get that map? Thank you. 11, right, this one right here.
So I think I have some comments, and I think it will touch on what you talked about. I actually really appreciated the public input, the public comment that we've had tonight. I think that is a beautiful illustration of the different interests and competing opinions and thoughts on how this area should be used. And I think I'll echo what others have said, that this is really, I feel strongly that this is a good balance between the different competing interests. Perhaps if we all sat down and drew our own map, if for every person that's here, we'd have a slightly different map that would, for what they want to see done with maybe the land next to them or the land that they own. But I do think this is a good balance, and I extend my gratitude for everyone that has served on these committees and have worked on this. And with that, so let me throw that to your question. In part because of that, I think everyone has tweaks. We've heard that these nodes are optional. They may take place, it may happen, they may not. I feel pretty good about where it's at now, so I wouldn't at this point support making changes. There's been a lot of discussion that's helped me clarify even my thoughts just tonight, but I came in tonight thinking, I'm going to support this, but I almost wish there was a little bit more gradient. There was a little bit more density in certain areas, which would allow for a little bit more, open space in other areas. But even that, even tipping the gradient more, I think would probably lessen some of the yellow spots that people have highlighted that are going to have use and value and as part of that mix. And so I really do think this is a good balance. My two personal pet things that I wish were a little bit different. We talked about last time about preservation of the Provo River Trail corridor. I pointed out some areas that I think maybe should be swapped from residential, agricultural and residential, just swap some of those areas around. We've had conversations about why it is what it is right now and how it's probably a good thing going forward. So I will support that, but I do hope that when we get to the text of the area master plan, we can have that principle of preservation of the Provo River Trail corridor, so that when people start drafting up plans, they know that that's important to the city, that they know that that's something that we're going to be looking for, just so we communicate that well. And then the last thing, I think you've heard me say this before, Mr. Pepperoni, but For example, I really like those dashed lines, kind of those three dots of the airport, industrial, commercial zones there, which just communicate to the landowner and future landowners, developers, that we expect to see a road in here. And I think that level of coordination, of organization of our street network below the collectors, kind of the sub-collectors, you could call them major, locals, whatever, but just a little bit of coordination so when people, again, start drafting up their designs, they know, oh, I'm going to have to be, there's going to be a road in here, just so we can coordinate that network a little bit broader. Those are the two things that I wish that was in here, but again, I think everyone has their own little things that they would love to throw in, and I think this represents a great balance. So I look forward to supporting it, and again, commend everyone who's worked on this up to this point.
Anyone else have an opinion about removing that commercial zone or node at 1100 West?
I personally like that commercial zone there, and I know the traffic can be an issue, and we'll deal with those things as we change the zoning. This is Dave.
So I had a couple of questions going into tonight, but I think my questions have been answered. I feel like I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, and it does seem to be a good balance to me. And I'm sure we would all have tweaks that we might want to propose. If I was going to propose any, which I won't, other than to just mention kind of what I was thinking about. As far as the commercial nodes, I'd almost wonder if there's enough. I like the addition of the node on the southwest of the freeway interchange there. And given that this is a corridor between the freeway and the airport, I just wonder if many years down the road there might be opportunities for even a little bit more, maybe even on the south side, but I don't think those are decisions that we need to make now. The other tweak that I wondered about was along the lines of Mr. Hanley's comment. There may be a few places where higher density would really be a good fit. The area he mentioned, maybe along 600 South as you get over toward closer to the front runner station. But again, I feel like these are things that could be addressed down the road, and I'm prepared to support this.
Any more comments? Discussion? Okay, then we have an implied motion. I will call for a vote on the implied motion. Those in favor? That passes unanimously then. Thank you for all your support and the work and the discussion on this. It's always helpful to have the public comment. And we're not through with this area. This is a plan. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done to have things come to fruition. So thank you for all your help, and we look forward to continued help. I'd like to ask a question. Who is here for item number 3? Is there anyone here for item number 3? There's Mr. Gardner. I think what I'd like to do, we had a meeting on this in work session, and I think we can put this one to bed quickly. If it's all right, I'd like to switch item number 3 and then move to item number 2. So we'll first begin with, this is an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 5.89 acres located at 1437 East, 2300 North, from public facilities to residential agriculture. Aaron Ardmore, if you're there, he is. We will turn the time to you.
Okay, thank you. If we could bring up the map. Do I have that power? No. Thank you. Cool. All right, so this was before you about a month ago, if you recall. Just to give you a little memory of it, this is 2300 North. This is the trailhead to Rock Canyon. And this is the property we're talking about. Used to be Ranger Station, is now just a vacant parcel. Here's the plan. The plan actually hasn't changed from last time you heard it. So the plan is still for 3 single-family residential lots. What has changed is the zone request. So before, where they were asking for a A1 zone, instead of right now it is currently a PF zone, they're asking for RA zone. The difference with this is the allowed uses. So they can still do the 3 single-family lots, but what they've done is proffered a development agreement to allow the lots to occur, but to withdraw any additional animal rights above that of a R1 residential zone, as is the zone to the west. And in addition to that, they've taken away through the development agreement any of the typical conditional uses found in the RA zone. So there's some commercial uses in the zone that wouldn't be permitted due to the development agreement that's been proffered. So again, it's just zone change to develop these 3 single-family lots. I believe the applicant has tried his best to address all the concerns. The applicant and owner are in support of this new development agreement and this new plan. And if you have any questions for me, I'll try to answer those.
Okay.
Aaron, can you just explain to me, we have a residential zone, we can have an R110 or whatever, and we have the residential agriculture with the development agreement. Can you tell me the difference, why the residential agriculture with the development agreement has an advantage over just going on R1?
Like we discussed last time, the main thing that's of interest to the applicant is the accessory building. They want a large accessory building in R1 zone that wouldn't be allowed.
And the heights?
The height is still restricted the same. It's
Yeah,
still
okay.
35 feet, just like R1. Yep.
Any other questions? We'll turn time over to the developer, Dave, who is representing the developer.
Yeah. My name is Dave Gardner, and I'm representing the property owner. I don't know if there's any additional questions. I think we've kind of hashed through this, but I'm happy to answer any questions the council might have.
Thanks, Dave. Neighborhood chair. I don't see Rachel. Aaron, can you report at the Planning Commission how that, with the representation of the neighborhood chair?
Again, I did receive an email saying due to these changes, they are in favor of this development. There's no further issues that they're aware of that need to be addressed. They apologize, they're out of town. They couldn't make it tonight.
Thank you. We will open this item to public comment, if there is any.
Joseph Ballantyne. I just have a question. I understood what was said was that the zoning, the agricultural part of the zoning would be limited to what's allowed in an R1 zone. Is that correct? So there would be no horses there. There would be no equestrian use. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, we will close public comment portion. Now, we have heard this as a council before, and except that it went back to the Planning Commission, I understand. Is that correct? And so this is actually, again, a first hearing. Is that correct? Or am I
Didn't it-
did it go back to Planning Commission?
It did go back to Planning Commission.
Does that make this another first hearing, or is this a second hearing?
That's a good question for Brian. I'm not
I
sure how
know,
we
so
translate
it went
that.
to Planning Commission on October 24th? Yes, so this is our first time hearing it since then. That's right.
So if that's the case, if there are any council members at this point that would like to continue this, you have the opportunity now. If not, we do have an implied motion. Any councilman, George?
I don't want to delay it. I just want to make a comment that I'm grateful for the cooperation of the property owner. If you could communicate that, I'm grateful for the feedback from the community. I think it's been a very healthy negotiation process, and I think we've got a product that's making everybody happy.
And I am very grateful for a developer who has been willing to listen to the community. Thank you. Okay, we have the implied motion. I will call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks for your help with that item number. Now we'll go back to item number 2, a resolution approving an environmental assessment, a proposed land and water conservation property conversion. And with that, Mr. Jones.
If I could take a minute before you
Please.
turn the time over to Scott. I've been asked by a few people over the last couple of weeks, and especially over the last couple of days, about the exact scope of this item, and so I just wanted to report on that if I could before we turn it over to Scott so that he can correct anything that I say. So as you're aware, because we've been dealing with this item for a while, Section 6F3 of the Land and Conservation Water Fund Act requires that any conversion to another use must be approved by the Secretary of the National Park Service. And relevant federal regulations in 36 CFR 59.3 sub 7 requires that before the Secretary can do that, there must be an environmental evaluation done. There are regulations specific to the state of Utah and that support those federal regulations that require that in order to do the environmental evaluation, there must be a public comment period of at least 30 days. It's my understanding that that public comment period ran from the 1st of October to the 31st of October and included a previous public hearing in front of this body on the 23rd of October. Therefore, under my review of the regulations, I believe that the process for creating the environmental assessment is over and the public comment period is over. So the next step then is to submit the environmental assessment to the state park service or park department, which will review it and then send it to the National Park Service if the criteria are met. The National Park Service may then approve that the fact that a conversion may take place. If that approval is received, at that point, then the terms of the sale necessary for the conversion to take place would still need to be negotiated and approved by the city. So tonight's resolution, the approval of tonight's resolution does not approve the sale. It approves the environmental assessment as a factually accurate description of the proposed conversion in order for that document to be sent to the National Park Service for its review to see if the criteria are met. So it's my understanding that that's the purpose tonight, is for the Parks Department to present the environmental assessment, including the updates made to it based on the public comment period, and for the council to begin its review of whether it approves that document as a factually accurate document that can be sent on for review.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. That's very helpful. One thing that we are, as a council, we are very sensitive to the neighborhood and the challenges that go along with this. As what we have decided to do, I'm going to read this statement, and this, we'll talk about it in a minute. The Parks and Recreation Department is still in the process of finalizing the environmental assessment prior to sending it to the state. At the conclusion of the item, when council is voting, staff requests 2 weeks to finalize that document and request this be placed on a consent agenda for November 27th, 2018 council meeting. What we will do tonight then, in the effort to hear all the people that have concerns about this, we will have one more public comment period, which we don't need to have, but we will have that tonight. we will say that any discussion that is held tonight, it will, again, if there are questions, it will be assessed in the environmental assessment over the next 2 weeks. Following that period, 2 weeks from tonight, as a council, we will put that on the consent agenda, which will not be open for public comment after that. So any public comment for this particular item will be held tonight. It will be addressed by the Parks and Recreation Department in the environmental assessment, and then in 2 weeks, it will be done as a consent item. Any questions from council members on that? Dave?
My understanding is that the purpose of the consent agenda is for items where there's really no questions or no substantial or significant opposition, and I don't feel that this item meets that standard, so my preference would be to not have it on the consent agenda.
Mr. Jones.
I don't have any comment on Mr. Sewell's comment, but I just wanted to clarify that even if the item is not on the consent agenda, and even if the council follows its standard procedure of allowing public comment on every agenda item, merely because someone stands up to speak about the item does not mean that that has to be included in the environmental assessment.
Now, that's the question that I had, because I was under the opinion that it had to be included in
Once the public comment period is over, that doesn't mean that people can't speak anymore, but the comments no longer need to be addressed, because there's not an open-ended rule that public comment just has to last for as long as people have things to say. And that's why I indicated earlier that from a legal standpoint, I think the public comment is already over, and that doesn't mean that you can't take public comment tonight. It doesn't mean that you can't take public comment at the next meeting, but those public comments, from a legal standpoint, only need to be for your consideration. They don't need to be addressed. Now, if it's the council's desire that comments from tonight be addressed in the environmental assessment, that's your call. My comment earlier was just a statement that legally I don't think that's required.
Can I get some help from Parks and Rec? Is that your understanding also? Then, does that make sense? So if we do open it up next week, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't vote on it and send it in 2 weeks.
And I think it's understood, but just to be clear, we're discussing the environmental assessment document. We're not debating whether or not we're going to sell the property.
Absolutely.
So that vote is not going to happen until we find out if the federal government has even approved this, right?
Absolutely. We don't have any. We will do some negotiation after that.
And since we do have an audio record, let me just state for the record that in response to Mr. Winterton's questions, there was a bunch of head nodding from the back of the room.
Oh, I appreciate that. So I just didn't want to have to delay this and delay it by having questions that needed to be addressed each and every time we have a public hearing. So with your explanation and with your agreement in the back from the Parks and Rec Department, we will open this up. We will turn the time over to Scott Henderson. Do you have anything to present at this time, Scott? Your name is on this list to start with.
Thank you very much again for this. I will turn immediately over to Ron Clegg, our consultant, who has been looking at and guiding us through this mitigation process. So he, I think, has a short 3-slide presentation, then we can move right to public comment then.
Thank you.
So I will be brief because I know you're getting sick of me. So you can go to the next slide. So where we're at is we had the draft, which was put out. There were some comments, quite a few comments that came in. We had a public hearing on that. We felt there were enough comments that it warranted being revised and put out again. So we put it out again. We coordinated with Susan Zara-Creasy at the state, who said, you need to respond to the comments on the second one, but you don't need to have another hearing. So that, in my mind, kind of closes that up so we can bring some closure to this and get it submitted to her. We just wanted to reemphasize the purpose and need for the conversion. Provo School District has a need to expand the Timpview High School campus and desires to purchase the property from Provo City. These are changes, some of these are changes from the original draft. They need to construct a girls' softball field on the campus and continue to provide open space for soccer practice, band practice, and other activities going on. We need to provide an opportunity to rebuild, and expand Timpview High School in the future. In the document, there's more details about how big the campus should be and all those kinds of issues, but I won't get into those here. Provo School District has a need to own and manage the property being used by the students, Timpview High School students. And the issues in the environmental assessment focus on safety and scheduling. And then Provo City has a desire to work with Provo School District to address their needs and also to clear up existing 6F issues that exist in the park. And so those were the three main focuses of the purpose and need for this conversion. The next steps are to address the comments which we received on the revised draft, which we are doing. We have comments from 4 individuals who responded. And so we're responding to those as we speak. Those will be included in the final environmental assessment, which will be submitted to you for your review prior to the, what am I trying to say? The document you're going to approve. Then you will prepare, so we'll prepare the final EA, then that goes to you for a vote on the 27th for the resolution. That's what I was thinking. And then we submit the final EA, and there's other supporting documents that have to be submitted. It's sort of a package to Susan Zarcarisi at the state. We have to submit appraisals. There's some forms we have to fill out, environmental assessment. So there's several things still that have to be completed and submitted. Then she will submit that to the National Park Service, and she coordinates with the Native American tribes. That's just part of the NEPA rules. And then the National Park Service makes a decision on the conversion. As you mentioned, this is not a decision of selling the park. This is a decision of can you convert the park from its current use. So not use, but as a Section 6F property. So that's kind of where we're at. Any questions? Okay.
Okay, we will now open this item for public hearing. Oh, neighborhood chairs. Thank you.
Good evening, Marion Monahan, Edgemont Neighborhood Chair. I have not worked on any project in our area that has taken as much time and energy as this one. And at every meeting that we've had, 100% of the people who live in Edgemont area have been opposed to selling this park. I hope that you remember that we put in a lot of money and effort to maintain the park, put in the playground for the children. If you'll remember the reasons why, because they could no longer use the Edgemont school. This park is used. It's not sitting idle. It is part of our neighborhood. I'm hoping that you will keep in mind that you took federal money, or the city, not you particularly, but the council at that time, to build this with the promise that it would be a park in perpetuity. I understand things change, but I also believe in keeping your word. So this does disturb me a lot that this is happening. So if you do decide to send this off to the parks to discuss whether we can sell this park or not, I do hope that you will somehow in your resolution put in there something that this continues to be shared open space. We're perfectly happy to share with the school. We've done it for years, and we'd love for them to continue letting us have our share of the park to remain as a very much of an asset in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion.
Sharon Memmott, Neighborhood Vice Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this again. Councils, we didn't feel like we were given proper time at the last public hearing. Since no vice chairs or vice chairs were invited to speak at that meeting, and so we were only given just our little 2 minutes of the public. At that meeting, we were given the impression that none of the council had yet read the 200-page environmental assessment. To this date, I've read 2 of them because of the revisions that were made, and I still don't know if any of you have read them. I hear you've gotten some of our emails and that you've responded to some of those. So to address what's on the agenda is the environmental assessment. And what we've, as neighborhoods, the neighborhood have seen in this issue is the environmental assessment has been done. What we feel like has not been addressed, and this is just some of the points, and I'll let some of my neighbors make some of the others, that the criteria for the sale, that it's in the LWCF, also a document I've read that's very long, is that one of the criteria for this sale to be started is that this be shown to be an obsolete piece of property, that it's not really used as a park anymore, which was the intent for the funds. But the neighbors have shown that they do use the park constantly and in many ways, in more ways than were even originally planned for this park. That's not addressed that I noticed in the environmental assessment at all, that we do still use the park, that it is not obsolete, as is one of those criteria. He does mention in his environmental assessment that the ball field is one of the problems that with the 6F, the LWCF funds, but he doesn't mention that several neighbors, it's being mentioned in the environmental assessment that it's only being used by the school, and that's a problem because of the LWCF funds. But many of the neighbors that live nearby, so they can see this property daily, can testify that that's not the case, that much of the public does use it when the school is not using it. The LWCF says that can be shared. He also, it's been mentioned that everybody's against the sale. Not so. I've been to the public meetings, but the way I would portray it, I guess, is that the vast majority is against this going forward. Those that have spoken in its favor are in favor of it maintaining that open space. They're hoping that it will stay fields, playing fields, ball fields, whatever the students that have gotten up and spoken. And that, in my opinion, is also not addressed in the environmental assessment. What I saw in the revised environmental assessment was that, yes, I read your comment, and here's how I feel it's addressed, but in my opinion, most of it isn't addressed. It's simply acknowledged. So either way, we all hope this stays open space. Whether you're for this going forward or not, I'm still hearing maintain that open space. So sorry, I did make notes so that I wouldn't ramble. So, and one of the questions is, if I was just paying attention to item 1 on your agenda, it says that you would approve, it was an ordinance to amend the general map plan regarding the west side of the Provo, and there was a regional park on that plan that you just approved, if I was paying attention correctly. And these funds aren't supposed to be used for something that's on the master plan. I don't know if I read that right or not. So in conclusion, we would hope, as Marion mentioned, that you would put something in the environmental assessment or in your resolution to add to the environmental assessment I know that it's not part of the agreement of the sale at this point, but that you would put that in writing for our understanding and for the National Park Service understanding that this is what the council's plan is, so that it can be used, and that portion of this property, which will become one unit, but that portion will maintain that open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, I think that concludes. I think those are the. Pam, you're a neighborhood vice chair. Are you interested in commenting at this point, or do you want to wait till public comment? Or that's the only other neighborhood chair that I see. So,
Pam Jones, the other vice chair of Edgemont neighborhood. I had a good talk with Mr. Sewell yesterday. He sends out a regular email about what's going to happen during the council meetings. And I was particularly upset over the implication that the money from the sale of the park was going to be applied to the regional park. And I said, this is not right to take assets from the northeast to give them to the southwest without giving us an equitable alternative. Mr. Henderson has talked about developing some vacant land just up the street from Timpview High School. Apparently it's between Timpview Drive and Canyon Road. And developing that into a park. But I'm hearing different things, that the city does not have control of all of that vacant land. I don't know how much has been set aside for a new park, or even that the city will actually do it. And it's hard to make an assessment when there's so many unknowns. We have to wait for the federal government to do their thing. We have to wait for the, whoever. And I think the neighborhood is owed a reasonable promise that we will be compensated as closely as possible to the loss of our park by getting a new park.
okay, we will now open this up for public comment.
I'm Lynn Garner. I live in Edgemont. We moved into the area of the park in 1968, apparently just after its sale. The environmental assessment does not adequately address the history of the park. In the late 60s, Junior Banus was approached by a representative of the school district who indicated they wanted to purchase that land, which was owned by the Banus family. He was given a mild threat of eminent domain when he demurred. Because of that threat, he obtained a lawyer, and together they worked out a deal with the city, and he decided to sell the land to the city with the understanding that it would remain a legacy park in perpetuity, and the federal funds that were used seemed to guarantee that. He later found out that that lawyer, by the way, was also working for the city. To try to overturn the intent of that park seems to us to be a bad idea. It does not honor the Banus family for their input. In fact, they did donate some of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Good evening. LaDawn Christensen, I live in Provo. Jay Goodliff, one of the neighbors, has a PhD that deals with formulation of environmental assessments. He has concerns about the factual accuracy of this this assessment. I hope you've all read Jay's comments that he sent you and consider if this EA is factual and written as it should be. As I understand, the need of the school district has nothing to do with the environment and this assessment. The EA should be revised before it's approved. I also want to address the concept that only 8 families on the fence line want the land to stay a park. We have lived on the border of the fence, those that are generally here to represent, for at least 10 years, and we witness how the park is used. There are a lot of new families moving into homes around the park as lifetime veterans of the neighborhood are passing on. Even in the last year or so, we've had a lot of turnover. Many are not aware of what is being considered for the park. I've documented usage of the park over this last summer and previously in photos, if any of you would like me to share those with you. And we feel like we are representing those families who may not be aware of what is going on with the park. We're also representing the document that states that the park was to remain a park in perpetuity. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Madam.
My name is Charlene Goodliff, and I live in the Edgemont Timpview neighborhood. And I'm going to focus on one issue because, for the sake of time, and I'm seeking clarification. So the draft assessment says the school should own adjacent land for safety reasons. So it was my understanding, in speaking with McKay Jensen and others from the school district, that the park area was going to remain much as it is now. And it didn't matter who owned it. It was going to be green space still. It was going to be shared and open. And there was going to be a playground still and a pavilion. They promised us all sorts of things verbally. I think they've done that before. He assured me that this area would be maintained and accessible to the public. So I've had my doubts about this, but it seems that the assessment is confirming that this area will be closed off for safety reasons. So given that new idea, my second thought is, if they're indeed closing off this space for safety reasons, I wonder how many of you believe that mothers and adults and children don't have a tempering influence on teenagers. Because in my experience, I go out there, and since I live close to the park, all I have to do is stand there, and not only my teenagers, but other teenagers start behaving differently. And I have personally intervened with littering, both the cleanup afterwards and the preventing of it. I've offered garbage cans to people who have needs. And I've discouraged truancy and tardiness, and just sitting there on the swing with my children or pushing them on the swing. It has prevented some other inappropriate behavior that has been beneficial to the school, I believe, and to those children, and to their parents, ultimately. And I think that it is a mistake that that buffer zone, which has always served as a buffer, both for the neighborhood and for the school, is that for safety reasons, we would get rid of it. A buffer zone is for safety. Thank you.
James Benson, Provo City. I live right by the park. In the environmental assessment, it mentions that Timpview High needs more ground to meet some sort of standard that's out there for a high school. Timpview daily uses that park. There are always people out there playing, joggers from the classrooms, from the gym. They use that park all the time. On top of that, in speaking with Superintendent Rattel of the school district, he has told us that his priority, as well as using that park, was to get the ground. His number one priority was to get the number one piece of property was the ground north of Timpview High between Canyon Road and Timpview Drive. He stated that for some reason Provo City doesn't want to sell that to him. But he stated to us, though, that was his priority. This park is used by the school all the time. In the environmental assessment, it just says there's some kind of standard for high schools that need more property, more acreage. One thing I don't see in the environmental assessment is there is a large canal, and it's got to have an easement that goes right through that park diagonally. I haven't seen anything in the environmental assessment concerning that big irrigation canal. I do own some of the water for that canal. The other thing that I see in the environmental assessment is the plot map or map of the Land and Water Conservation Fund's property that part of Timpview Drive is built on. I don't know if the map is incorrect or what is going on there. If the sale does go through, is the school going to be buying that property from the city, or is the city going to be deducting that part of the property off of the acreage that is going to be sold? Thank you.
Elda Benson. I'm there close by the park as well in Edgemont. I'd like to focus on Brian Jones's comment where he says, comment regarding the factual accuracy of the environmental assessment document. There are there's an abundance of inaccuracies, and I will quote from the revised environmental assessment. In the executive summary, it states, however, the ball field was constructed by Provo School District, the Timpview High School boys baseball team. This baseball field is generally not available for use by the public. Correction. This baseball field has been available and is currently available and used by the public on a regular basis. I live directly behind this baseball field. I know what is occurring on that field every day by simply looking out my kitchen window. The second area that I'd like to address is Title X, the Title IX issue, because that keeps being brought up. The purpose, and this is another quote coming directly from the revised issue of the environmental assessment. The purpose and need for an action includes the following: the need to construct a girls' softball field on campus. Timpview High School does not have a girls' softball field on campus. Correction, neither do the boys. As soon as this property is purchased, the boys will then have a baseball field. The girls will not. You will be at risk. Provo School District will then be at risk for Title IX issue. The plan that is listed in the revised document states Provo School District does not plan, the Provo School District does plan to build Timpview High School girls softball field on part of the site in the future. My question is, what does the future mean? What does the future mean? And just by stating that it has a plan to build it in the future, does that mean that you are complying with Title IX compliance issues? And the last thing that I want to address is the pathway. You say it's an access road. It's not an access road. It was a pathway that was built back in 1977 for the children that lived up in Indian Hills to walk down to Edgemont Elementary. Provo School District put a cell tower in. Provo City put in a well house. Provo School District put in honey buckets, therefore making it an access road. Was never intended to be an access road. So between Provo City and Provo School District, the trailway that was built for children to use to access elementary, Edgemont Elementary School, you've changed the verbiage for it to be an access road when it's simply a walking trail that is used every day as a walking trail for the neighborhood, for neighbors to walk and exercise and access up above into Indian Hills. Thanks.
Thank you.
Derek Hansen from Pleasant View area. I don't live really close to the park, but I'm there usually more than once a day coaching the cross-country team, as well as just watching the hundreds of joggers that come by and use the bathrooms that are there that the city puts out. A couple of things, just I realize this isn't about the sale of the property, but it's a little disconcerting. The first version of this that came out seemed like a sales pitch, not like it was actually trying to assess the impact of something from an unbiased perspective. And while the updated version, I guess, acknowledged, like was said earlier, some of the deficiencies, like the fact they didn't even mention there's a well there. They didn't talk about the berm that was developed to prevent some of the flooding. There were things that were clearly should have been stated and discussed in an environmental study. And it just gives me very little confidence that that this has been done as an objective, let's find out what the actual environmental impact is of this. I can say the park is used all the time. I represent about 40 ultimate Frisbee players who use it several times a week. I see people on the baseball field, not just the Timpview students. We use that also when we overflow off the main one up onto that area. And I'm also concerned, they talk about about perhaps using this as a staging area to build, when construction of Timpview, an updated version might happen. And I worry that the well, I don't know, can that handle? Is it going to cause problems with the water around there if that happens? So I hope that you'll listen to the community and try to address some of these concerns.
Council members and mayor, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Jay Goodliff. I've lived in Provo for over 21 years. I wonder if you could switch back to the earlier slide. Would that be all right? Mr. Clegg is correct that these reasons are given much more prominence in the revised report, and the fact that these are given such prominence has made me concerned, because this is treated as a principal document. That is, it's going to become a federal document once it's sent to the federal government for what are reasons that Provo feels are adequate to sell a park to another entity, such as the school district. So the first reason given is that Provo School District has a need to expand, and one of the things that's used quite often in that report is that it's currently short of the Utah State Office of Education guidelines. Well, if you look at those guidelines, out of the 18 schools that Provo School District owns, 17 of them do not fit the guideline. So if you are ready to sell the park to Timpview High School because it needs the space, will you be also willing to sell the park next, say, It's next to Centennial, where they have 15 acres, but the guidelines say they should have over 30. Or Dixon Middle School, when they say they have 8 acres, and they should be having 28 or 29. When they need to expand, would you be willing to sell footprint or park to them? The second reason, Provo School District has a need to own and manage the property used by the students, particularly for safety reasons, because they're on there. Well, there are many parks that are adjacent to schools by design. They are being used by the school citizens. My son, Benjamin, who came with me today, goes to Centennial High School, and he uses Sertoma Park during recreation time, and the PE classes use it there. Well, for the same reason, then should Centennial take over that park for safety reasons because it's used by the students? Is the Provo Council ready to sell all the parks that are adjacent to schools for the same reason? If you're not ready for that to do it for other parks, for other schools, I don't think it should be a reason for the Timpview High School. That is, we should be using principles in this environmental assessment that the city would be willing to abide by for any school or for any park, that you'd want to follow those principles and see that you would be willing to follow them to their logical conclusion. If you're not willing to do it for other schools, I don't think you should be willing to do it for Timpview High School. This is whether you believe in selling the park or not. I think my position is clear. But as a matter of principle, from the city council, what are the reasons that you're willing to state that you're willing to sell a park? Is it because you can get more space on the west side because it is less expensive than the space on the east side? You see that in the report as well. Also, it's been told to me by staff, you get a bigger park. That is, you get the soccer complex, which is great. But that's true for every park on the east side and any park that's next to a school. That would sell for more. You could get more undeveloped land and you could develop that. So I don't think those are good reasons, good principles to list in an environmental assessment that would be going to the federal government. Those are not good reasons to sell the land. There may be good reasons to sell the land to the park. Provo City has a desire to work with them. But I don't think these are
can you
good
wrap it
reasons.
up here?
That's it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Jay. Any other public comment at this time? Mr. McKay, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us. I again continue to appreciate this process. We learned a lot from each other. Where we're at in the process, and a long process, is whether the 6F can be converted. And in doing that, we're trying to give, we are certainly interested in that piece of property. Everyone knows the school district is interested in that piece of property. They're interested in having their park the same as it's always been, and we certainly understand that as well. You very well know that it's not something that you need to do as far as having a park. It's something that to come up with the money to purchase grass, to be grass, is something that's difficult for the school district to do. We have taken the position on the Provo Board of Education that it's the right thing to do because we think that overall it benefits the city as a whole. In that regard, in benefiting the city as a whole, I know that a lot of folks are just really worried that it won't be public access or a public park. That when we say we need to expand the school, that means that we're gonna put new buildings over there, that we won't account for the well, that we're going to change the nature of the park drastically. We are not. As part of I'll just remind you that as part of the environmental assessment, there's a letter included from the superintendent that was approved by the school district that says that the board is willing to explore and negotiate something recordable against the property, such as a deed restriction. People have said, we can't trust you can't trust the board, but we can put something against the property to say this is how this property will use, and that deed restriction would address how that property can be used and access. That's what we expect. Any other details beyond that, we don't know what we're going to buy because first, The environmental assessment will need to go to the federal government. They'll have requirements that come back. That will affect the sales price. That will affect what we can even do with it. But we are prepared to put something recordable against the property, such as a deed restriction that specifies future use and access. And so we believe that that's how this is going to benefit the city as a whole. That we'll still have a park, a playground for kids, a pavilion, open space for soccer, open space for cross country, and grass for grass. We think that we do need that for the benefit of the whole city. It's an opportunity for the whole city. It's not something that we have to do. We understand that. We think it's an opportunity to do something for the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. And I'll just, for the record, we allowed him a few more minutes, as we did neighborhood chairs, because of his position on the school board. Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. I think that's good. Is there anyone, Parks and Rec, do you have any response to anything that you've heard tonight, or do you want to deal with anything at this point?
Thank you. I'm sure some of these that I'll defer to Ron, or if I'm saying that, we have never questioned the popularity of our parks, and we don't know of a park that's obsolete, but that's a singular factor. I mean, use and needs in a community change, and this is part of that process. We're not really in a position to deny a school district need. So we went through this process. This is something that you've never seen us come to you before, on this type of thing. But it is a recognized need of the school district with the girls softball field, which we are helping with right now, mitigating during these times at a park much further away, which is less convenient for their team. But we're not denying the use of this park. Now, where we talk and where we go is degrees of non-compliance. Yes, I do realize that a ball field, when people aren't playing baseball, could be a great place to fly a kite. But then there are times where it's scheduled and maintained, and in fact, in year-round, it is scheduled and maintained by the school district. Not to bring up a tough incident, but I think Council Member Van Buren knows from an injury how important, especially in athletics, and that's what makes a high school different than an elementary school in formalized athletics, about how the maintenance of athletic turf is a major issue, and defined responsibility for that is a major issue. And that is something that when Timpview's home baseball field is on our property, we felt it was clear that they need to be responsible for the maintenance of that for athletic fields and the scheduling of that. We feel that's important. From the very start, Parks and Recreation's role at the table has been to try to protect the park amenities that exist there. And I think we will see that, especially from the intent letter provided by the school district. I think if it gets to that point, I think we will be able to protect those park amenities as part of this process. Or quite frankly, the Parks and Recreation Department would have never gotten involved in this. So there's different stories on different areas. There's access roads that provide access to the cell phone tower, and the outfield fence was actually moved on the baseball field to provide that access road and go in there. So there's different stories and different times that go through this. And I won't go through all that, but I just felt in a lot of ways, as the representative of Parks and Recreation, I wanted to go through a little bit of the narrative from our side, and I won't go into all those different areas. We do own all of the park to the north, the Canyon Drive Park, but part of that needs to have a road in it that was master planned. So what you see is not all going to be park. There's design elements that are coming to that. And as this body knows and everybody knows here, we have committed, if this goes through and is approved by the federal government and an agreement is in place, that we have committed to that neighborhood that we will move that to the top of the list and fund that from impact fees and RAP tax and those funds that are available to our park. And that park moves to the top where right now it sits at the bottom. So I guess that hopefully that tells you a little bit where we're at and some of the concepts and values that we have in a process that we're not very used to either. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, with any comments we'll close public comment period and we'll bring it back to the council for any discussion at this point. Dave?
So, first of all, I think there's a number of aspects of this that most everyone involved would agree with. I think the regional sports park is an idea that I really haven't heard any opposition to, and I've heard a lot of enthusiasm for, and I think it'd be a wonderful asset for the city. And frankly, I think that should go forward regardless of what happens with Municipal Park. I also think that pretty much everybody involved, including the neighbors who've shared concerns, are supportive of our schools, are supportive of our sports programs, of having places to play for our youth that are in those programs. I wish that there had somehow been another way to approach this so that we could have sat down with the Banus family representatives and the neighbors in the area and tried to work something out very early on. This has been a very difficult process. I do have, I'm supportive of the two objectives that I just mentioned, but I do have concerns about the process and about the environmental assessment itself. As I read through the requirements of the 6F program, I'll just mention a few of them here. It says Section 6F of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act of 1965 requires all property acquired, developed, or improved with assistance from the LWCF grant program shall be retained and used for public outdoor recreation in perpetuity, and then in parentheses it says forever. It does outline a process for conversion, but it says that a conversion of use of any project should be avoided if at all possible. And elsewhere in the document it says that all practical alternatives to the conversion must be evaluated and rejected on a sound basis. I'm not sure that has happened. It says the proposed property for replacement must be of reasonably equal usefulness and location as that being converted. I have a hard time being fully on board with that. I think my biggest concern about this is the idea of, I ask myself, what if I had been involved 30 years ago, if I had been involved in city government at the time, and if I had been in those discussions with the Banus family and all that, how would I feel about taking this action today or moving ahead with this conversion? I'm not sure that I would feel like we'd honored the spirit of that agreement. And one reason that I have that aching concern is that most of the people who know the Banus family and are in that area have concerns about the way this is played out. And these are good citizens, involved citizens, and that concerns me. I feel like trust in government in general is on a decline. Even in local government, it seems. Just on that note, just coincidentally, I got an email just yesterday. I just want to read a couple of excerpts from it. You, Dave Sewell, are a threat to our city. And then the writer goes on to talk about how he felt like I and other city representatives were sort of involved in a conspiracy to recount the bond votes until we got it to the total to come out to our liking. And then at the end of the email, and of course I replied and explained how the city isn't even involved at all in counting the votes, but he replied with what I think he intended to be an ultimate insult. And I kind of took it that way too. He said, "You're no better than a Washington politician." And anyway, I think it matters when we tell people that we're going to do things. If somebody offers to sell us land and even donates a part of it, I think the spirit and intent of that agreement matters. So even though I support the ultimate objectives, I won't be able to vote for the conversion for those reasons. I do think there are some ways to move forward, though. I think one of them was outlined by our school board president. I think a recorded deed restriction that basically puts legal protections behind what the school board has been saying from the very beginning, that they want to keep that southern part open and available to the public, the playground equipment, and so on and so on. That seems like maybe about as close as we can get to a win-win resolution, and would come very close to honoring the spirit of the original agreements that were made. One other one that I wish we'd explored that might have been even cleaner, maybe too late, but a partial conversion with the city retaining ownership of that southern piece where the school board has said they want to keep open for public use anyway. That might have been another, or I think maybe even Superintendent Rutel mentioned possibility of maybe selling back that piece. So it seems like there's options here that where we can get the space for Timpview, we can have the facilities for our youth, we can have some money go toward these other things that we want to do in Southwest Provo. Oh, by the way, I believe Mr. Henderson at one point publicly mentioned that Parks and Rec was willing to sort of prioritize the development of that park a few blocks north. And I think that would be a wonderful gesture to kind of, round this out as a win-win situation for everything, for everyone involved. So those are paths forward that I see that could maybe bring us together for the most part on this. And those are options that I could support. Unfortunately, I won't be able to support voting for the conversion itself.
Mr. Harding.
Perhaps I'm confused, so maybe I'll look for staff if they can correct me, but everything that I believe you talked about is still on the table. I believe that's what we're talking about the whole time. It's just at this point in the process, we're looking to approve the environmental assessment so that it can go to the federal government. My understanding is that at that point, we wait a period of time, they get back to us, and then at that point, once we know any additional requirements and anything else we have to change, but at that point, we then go to the negotiating table with the school district. hearing from our public again, and then we work out the arrangement. So I may have missed something, but I think everything that you mentioned there is still completely on the table. Just tonight we're asking, do we accept this to be sent on to the government?
May I respond?
Dave?
And I understand that, and I agree with what you're saying there. And I guess I'm maybe hoping and expecting that that this vote will pass, even though I personally don't feel comfortable with the statements that are in the environmental assessment and some of the reasoning that's been used. I think every time I read Mr. Goodliff's emails, I just there are just so many holes in some of the reasoning there that I'm just not comfortable with it in its current state. So.
I'm just wondering, so at the beginning of this meeting, you talked about listening to the public and then having these concerns that are brought up addressed. And obviously, there are concerns that Councilman Sewell would like to see addressed. I'm concerned that some of these things have not been fully addressed. Since it's supposed to be an environmental assessment, and yet some of the environmental things are not adequately addressed. And I hope that the things that have been brought up can be addressed, and maybe we can get closer to being comfortable with the environmental assessment. And I hope that the environmental assessment includes and makes it clear the history and the concerns of the neighbors. You know, the idea that it would be public use or park in perpetuity is very, very important. Keeping our word is important. Now, one could say, does it matter who owns it if you have a deed restriction on city property or school property, that it's going to be used a certain way? Well, maybe the ownership's not the issue. It's the trust of either body to keep their word, and having a deed restriction would be one very good way to kind of ensure that. So I share a lot of the concerns that Councilman Sewell brought up, and hope that we can have in the next couple of weeks some of these things more fully addressed.
George?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for everybody involved in this. I think everybody is acting in good faith. I think people are speaking from what they understand and to the best of their ability. I've felt ever since the very beginning of this that the only win-win is a secure protection of this space that is virtually indistinguishable from what it's like right now, to such a degree that the change of ownership doesn't matter. Otherwise, there might be some slight changes in that we would want to we would have to live with if we could agree that this is desirable for all parties. I mean, I hear obviously and feel the same way. I want that park. I don't live there, but I have used it and can certainly understand why people who live there want it even more intensely to remain an open space. I hear too that the neighbors don't want the school to move, and I think that's pretty much universal. I don't know, maybe there are people who have such negative feelings about the school that they would prefer that it move, but of course, I think as soon as you admit that, you recognize that space could become dramatically different than what it is, and I think most people probably prefer that it remain. So it does seem to me that we have competing needs acting upon us that require adequate compromises, and it does seem to me that all along that the adequate compromise was some strong guarantee in perpetuity that the space would remain accessible with some slight changes in ownership and perhaps a few other things. But the schools' needs need to be addressed somehow, and if we don't address them, then we face the possibility of them needing to find another place. It does seem to me that we're in a bit of a catch-22. I mean, I don't want to send off an environmental assessment that we don't feel comfortable with. And I did read the last version. I haven't read the most recent version, and I was waiting to find out what else was in there after tonight. But I do think the catch-22 is that we can't guarantee any of that without the conversion being granted, right? I mean, we're sort of at a dead end if the conversion isn't granted. Then seems to me we're unless there's something I'm not seeing, but it seems like we're kind of in a pinch. So I'm eager to find that resolution. But as I've said all along, I don't want to support something that can't provide those kind of guarantees. I'm relatively confident and optimistic that we will. I trust the school district. I trust government, which is hilarious to say as a city council member. But I still think of myself as a little bit of an outsider since I haven't yet completed my first year in office. But I really lament the spirit of distrust, and especially on a city level, because we know each other and we can talk to each other. We know each other's names, and we can call each other and we can have conversations, and we can be civil. And I have many friends in this room and many friends in the city who see things differently, and I think it's beautiful and wonderful that we can talk things through and make compromises. And I hope most people, I think, do understand that. It's sad that some people you are no Washington politician, Dave Sewell. I just want to say that right here, right now. You are far from it. So anyway, I think our Parks and Rec department is fabulous. I think the school district is fabulous, and I think the entire Edgemont-Timpview neighborhood is wonderful. And maybe I'm sounding like Pollyanna, but I do think we can work this out. But I hope tonight that there are some improvements that can still be made in the environmental assessment, that we can get to a satisfactory conclusion on that.
I guess that would be my question, is that can we address some of the concerns again that you've heard
I
tonight?
just wanted to clarify, part of the reason we've asked to push off the resolution is because we are addressing all those comments that got raised tonight. Those have been submitted in writing. We wanted to make sure they were adequately addressed, and so we're not ignoring those comments. It's going to take some time to address some of them. So that's why we asked for 2 weeks to kind of get those addressed properly. So you can review the responses and decide if it's acceptable to you or not. But we're certainly not ignoring those comments, and so that's kind of where we're at with that process.
Thank you. George.
I just hope that we understand there's some concerns that can be addressed and some might not be able to be addressed. Because the concerns are sometimes personal, sometimes neighborhood, maybe not citywide. So I just hope that we as a council can look at it objectively and say, have they addressed the concerns as well as they can be addressed? And if we don't think they are, then we shouldn't send it.
Any other comments? Okay, with that being said, we will, Dave, you have one more.
Well, I mean, given that it's not even finished yet, I was just going to make a motion that we actually vote on it next time after we can see the final
I think
result.
that's what is planned on doing. We plan on doing. We will bring it back, and with the understanding that we can vote on it next week. In 2 weeks, next council meeting, and that any things that the public comment period has actually been closed. But we will do all we can to address what we have heard this evening. And Brian, help me with the comment.
I think it's probably worth actually making a motion to that effect, since the publication of the notice of public hearing specified that the public comment period was from October 1st to the 31st, but you have taken additional public comment that you want included in it. I think, and since we have an implied motion on the table, even though there's, I think, a generally agreed to plan, I think it would be worth making a motion that the public comment period on this item is now formally closed and that the item will be continued for 2 weeks for consideration of the resolution to be brought back to the council.
So
That was the intent of my motion.
Okay, the only point of clarification, I may have misunderstood, but it sounded like Mr. Clegg was saying that the comments that we heard tonight have previously been received in writing during the public comment period. So I'm not certain that they were saying that they wanted tonight to be considered part of that, just that these comments had been received during the public comment period and they still need another 2 weeks to fully address them.
Did you hear anything new in this public period that you have not already received?
So that's just my. I guess another way to flip that around is to ask, does the Parks Department have any concerns about what is being discussed here about considering tonight's public comment as part of the official public comment period and formally addressing them? I'm seeing thumbs up and shakes of no concerns. No concerns, that sounds good, okay. And if that's
So I was asking Mr. Sewell if that's what I was saying, and I guess to clarify, I was repeating what I understood Chair Winterton to have said was his intent at the beginning of the meeting. So from my perspective, from a legal perspective, I don't care whether you consider tonight's hearing as part of the public comment period or not, but I understood it to be at least Chair Winterton's intent that happened when he set the start of the meeting. So.
My concern is that I just didn't, we had to hit a point that I thought that we needed to decide whether we were going to send this in or not. And I would like to include tonight's comments if it's possible, and if those have already been received and can be addressed within the environmental assessment. Maybe we can change that rather than from till October 31st, we can change it to through today's November 12th.
Well, and that was the intent of what I was suggesting that the motion be, was that the motion be that tonight's public comments be included in the updates being prepared by staff, but that tonight be formally considered the close of the public comment period, and that the resulting draft be brought back to you in 2 weeks. That's what I would suggest the motion be.
Do we have a motion to that effect then?
Second that
So moved.
you made.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Sewell, and second by Mr. Stewart. Any comment on the motion?
Thank you for working that out with me. I feel much better about it, and just thank you all.
Okay. Any other comment? Then we will call for a vote. Those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you. We will now, we have, the other two items have been either they've been continued, one continued or one withdrawn, I think. Withdrawn and one continued, and so we will adjourn by common consent.